Hi, I'm Ven, and welcome to my book corner. Today I'm taking a look at a book that has been recommended to me by numerous different places, and that is Nettle Bone by T Kingfisher. This is a supernatural horror fantasy and has an interesting take on some of the more traditional fairy tale roles that you see in many other media. As normal, we shall start by looking at the story. We'll then move on to characters, world building, and then go through some of the pros and cons of this title. So let's just jump straight in. The story is taken from the point of view of Princess Marra, the third of three young daughters who are born into the royalty of a sort of river coastal kingdom. Unfortunately, this kingdom is quite small and is neighboured by two massively powerful other kingdoms who would be fighting over it otherwise, and as a result the head of the house has arranged for the eldest daughter to be married to the prince of the northern kingdom. However, she meets an untimely end not a huge distance after getting married, so then it goes down to this middle child, who is then also wedded to him. Marra is then moved away to go and live basically in a nunnery, where she would first of all be safe and out of the public eye. However, after the birth of the first child, when Marra goes and visits, she gets the impression or the definite belief that the prince is abusive towards her older sister, and hence comes a sort of a quest to try and kill him to get her away from him in a way that won't doom the kingdom. And you kind of have this sort of wander through to find the party of sorts, where you end up with a rescued chieftain's son, I think he is, from another kingdom, a grave hag, which is basically a necromancer for want of a better word, and a fairy godmother who was in fact Marra's fairy godmother, who bestowed the gift of health on her when she was born. And it's actually quite an interesting tale because there's some little wrinkles in here around the fact that the prince is protected from magic from an enemy kingdom, and also you've got the political intrigues involved here as well. The majority of this story is the moving around and getting all the pieces in play before they try to kill him at the end of the story, and then the fallout from that. And actually I have to say it's really well told. There's some interesting tweaks here to what you'd call traditional fairy tale trappings. So for example, the godmother can also curse, and each godmother has specific powers and strengths which they're really good at. Some are better at the curses, some are better at the blessings, and whilst it's not something we haven't seen elsewhere before, it's really well done here, as well as interesting interpretation of how the sort of the death witch or the grave talker or whatever you choose to call her, how her magic interacts with the world. And it's actually a really interesting story and the sort of growth of these group of people as they get to know each other and go on this almost doomed mission to save Marra's sister. It's a pretty good story. So you spend most of the time following Princess Marra, and she is basically quite a caring person, quite soft in many regards. She doesn't get a massive amount of characterization. She's very much the focal point for everything coming together. However, everybody in this book does have sort of key personality traits that means they mesh really well. So Marra is the obvious one who's sort of pulling them all together, and she really feels for what her sister is going through and what her elder sister went through as well, especially when it becomes clear that maybe it wasn't an accidental death. You then have the sort of the death witch, who is very cranky and basically gives us some impossible jobs to do, like make a dog out of bones and capture moonlight in a jar, stuff like that. Because following the logic that if you go to do an impossible task, you might as well get used to doing impossible things. And she's very much the smartest person in the room, and she's like a cranky old woman, and it's brilliant. You then have sort of the fallen knight, who is very much the paragon of honor and loyalty, which befits the gifts that he was given by his fairy godmother, and you sort of have a romantic angle going on between him and Marra by the end of the book. And of course you also have the fairy godmother, who is originally shown as being pretty useless. However, as it turns out, she's actually incredibly powerful, but not in the gifts that people think she is. She has this thing where she's blessed all the royal family with health, and Marra stood there going, why didn't you give us something useful? It turns out that blessings isn't necessarily her strong suit. You also have some interesting little touches for the side characters, so you get a sense for the long-suffering sister. The mother is very much portrayed as I'm doing this for the kingdom, and everyone is just pawns to keep the kingdom safe, to save lives. And Prince Vorlong, who is the prince that's married to, is not particularly well characterized, but it's made clear that he's someone who has power and is quite cruel in nature. And there's a few other characters that you meet along the way as well. There is another fairy godmother who, at least at the beginning, appears to be sort of, you'd think, the focus of evil for the Northern Kingdom. So the characterization is good. It's not especially deep, but it is a relatively short book, coming in at about 330 pages, and it does have a few characters struggle, but they have enough personality there to make it work. And the personalities and the interaction between the sort of core four is what makes this book in many regards. So the world building here is actually really strong. You get a sense of the politics of the situation for sort of the Harbour Kingdom and the issues they've got with super powerful neighbours north and south of them, and the political intrigues going on there. You have some very passive world building around the importance of things like godmothers and how most royal families do have them, but not everyone has access to them, and the different way they're revered. You have the different countries and the different names they have for, like, godmothers or for the grave witches, and the different sort of aspects that they take in the different cultures is really well done as well. There's a little bit of look at some of the basic everyday people. There's a really interesting interaction in the last quarter of the book involving a sort of a hostel owner and sort of the demon, for want of a better word, from their own past that they've basically made into a tiny angry god. And it's made very clear that magic is an accepted part of the realm, which isn't always done in a lot of books. It's quite often seen as a bit of an aberration. And you also get a sense that certain magics are very much prohibited. It also touches on religion. Saint of Grackles is kind of the main one. That's the monastery for where the princess went to when she was sent away. And it's kind of acknowledged that they don't really pray to them. They believe that they're there, but they don't really interact with the world. And you do have these saints who act like the godlike figures who seem to be the focus of prayer in this world. And it all adds to the general atmosphere of the world in general, and build on superstitions and fairy tales and that sort of thing that we see in our real world. And for that, it really informs the mood of the book and actually helps elevate a lot of the actions that go on. So that's really good in here. So this is a book that comes with very few cons for me personally. There's a little bit of structural stuff at the beginning where you're starting in present day before then going into quite a meaty sort of backstory section. Before coming back into present day, which I would personally have not done, I'd have flipped them so that it was a contiguous line in terms of timeline. But because of what's happening in that first chapter, it very much acts as a hook to the main character and also the world in general. So it's not a massive issue in the grand scheme of things. The bigger issue I have is, again, it's a character thing. Whilst everyone does have great personalities, this is another example of where the lead character is a little bit vanilla for me personally. They're almost a little bit too good to be true in the way they are in many regards, and I'm finding that in more and more books recently, almost as if they're meant to be the avatar for us in the story rather than a personality of their own sort of right, so to speak. However, onto the positives, the atmosphere in this book is fantastic, and it has a really interesting take on how fairy tales can work. The twists around the godmother's powers in particular are really well done, and the godmother for the Northern Kingdom has a really interesting twist to their existence as well, which is especially well done. It also touches on places like the Fae and goblin markets and superstitions, which also help really inform the world, and I think the world building in many regards is what makes this book. I will also say that whilst I do have some concerns with the main character, the actual cast overall are really well done. There is a great deal of personality in the interplay, especially between sort of the gravewitch and the fairy godmother. Is absolutely really interesting banter all the way through, and it's really well done. So for me, this is an easy recommend. I'd put this safely in my A tier of reads for the year so far. I will say that I don't really class this as a horror personally. It's more of a supernatural fantasy to me. It certainly does have some horror elements in there though, but it sort of leans more towards the fantasy side for me personally. But have you read any of Kingfisher's books? If so, are there any that you recommend that I should read? I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll catch you all next time.